She didn't believe in soulmates. Not anymore. Not since her 28th birthday, when her ex proposed using the words for the tax benefits. Not since her father left a voicemail instead of showing up to her graduation. Not since the world stopped feeling like a promise and started feeling like a politely worded rejection. But June Carver still wrote to him. Dear future husband. That's how every letter began. It started as a joke, then became a ritual. She wrote one after her mom passed, another after her dog got sick. She wrote when her cafe job cut her hours, when she missed a friend's wedding, when the apartment above hers flooded and ruined all her books. Sometimes she wrote 2 sentences, sometimes 10 pages, all of it honest, none of it sent. The letters lived in a shoebox under her bed, a pale green one with a broken latch, full of folded paper and ink-smudged emotion. Little pieces of herself, sealed in silence. She told him about the things she never said aloud. That sometimes she cried when happy people hug in public. That she still feared being abandoned in rooms where everyone smiled. That she hated opening voicemail. She never planned to stop. But something in her had shifted. On a cold Thursday morning, June woke up and realized she had nothing left to write. Not because she'd healed, but because she'd grown used to the ache. She pulled the shoebox from under the bed, dusted off. It was lighter than it looked, like it had already let go of her. She sat at her desk, stared at the last blank page, and wrote one final time. I don't know if you exist, but if you do, thank you for reading. Even if it was just in my head. She folded the letter neatly, slipped it into the middle of the stack, then taped the box shut. No playlist, no candles, no dramatic goodbyes. Just stillness and a quiet, inward nod, the kind that only means I'm done. She carried the box to her hallway closet, pushed it between an old, oscillating fan and a torn, reusable grocery bag, tugged the door with both hands. It always stuck halfway. She never noticed that a single envelope, letter number 37, slid down the side of the shelf. It fluttered once, then twice, and vanished behind the metal fuse box. June pulled on her coat, checked her scarf in the mirror, then walked out without looking back. 2 floors below, in the cracked lobby of the building she'd lived in for 6 years, a man in a gray wool coat stood beside the radiator, clipboard in hand, phone on silent. His name was Miles Thorne, 37, private, controlled. The man whose name was whispered on stock market blogs and tech insider circles, but never in his own boardroom. He didn't believe in messiness, or feeling too much, or doing things just because they felt right. But today, he wasn't sure why he'd come here. He told his assistant he was checking on a permit delay, told the property manager he wanted to inspect the old boiler room. But truthfully, he hadn't been able to stop thinking about this building, the one he bought 6 months ago, the one he kept refusing to demolish. He stood in the quiet hallway, scanning aging blueprints and staring at the creaky old mail chute. Something about it felt stuck in time. Then he saw it, an envelope, thin, cream-colored, tucked at the base of the chute like it had been placed there, not dropped. No stump, no return address, just a line written in neat, slanted handwriting. To my future husband, letter number 37. He turned it over once, then again, and for the first time in years, Miles Thorne, the man who signed billion-dollar deals without blinking, didn't know what to do. He didn't mean to open it, but something about the letter, the weight of it in his hand, the way her words filled the page like she was whispering directly to him. He read it once, then twice, and something shifted inside him, something he thought was gone. Miles Thorne wasn't a man who lost time. His entire empire was built on micro-efficiency, predictive modeling, strategic silence, and a cold ability to calculate the outcome of any conversation before it even happened. His life was spreadsheets and leverage, legacy and margins. Everything else was noise. But this letter, this one letter, he read it standing in a drafty hallway beside an ancient radiator that still hissed like it was holding onto the past. Her handwriting was small and neat, but not perfect. A little slanted, a little hesitant, like she'd written it late at night when she wasn't sure anyone would ever see it. Dear future husband, it began. If you're reading this, you probably aren't real. Not because I don't believe in love, but because I don't believe someone like me ever gets picked first. He froze, not because the sentence was clever, but because it wasn't. It was honest, the kind of honesty no one had spoken to him in years. I'm not great at first impressions. I talk too fast when I'm nervous. I say sorry when I mean thank you. I cry at things I pretend don't matter. But if you're patient with me, I swear I'll be the softest place you've ever landed. Miles stopped reading, not because he was done, but because he suddenly couldn't see the words clearly. His throat burned, like some emotion had risen up from nowhere and lodged itself in his chest. He didn't recognize it. Not grief, not longing. Something older, something buried. The letter wasn't long, but it unraveled him more with every line. I still believe in morning coffee and matching playlists, and that maybe, just maybe, there's someone out there who sees people before they try to fix them. I don't want perfection. I just want someone whose quiet feels like mine. And then the last line, if you exist, thank you. Even if we never meet, you help me remember I deserve to be chosen. He held it for a long moment, then folded it, carefully, and slid it into his coat pocket. He didn't know her name. He didn't know which apartment she lived in. He didn't even know why this particular letter had found him and not the trash chute 2 feet away. But somehow, he felt like it was meant to, and that terrified him more than any hostile takeover ever had. That night, he didn't go back to the penthouse. He told his driver to circle the block 3 times, then had him drop him off at an anonymous hotel in Midtown. The kind with blackout curtains and a complimentary toothbrush still in plastic. He didn't sleep. He just lay on top of the covers, staring at the envelope on the nightstand like it was the first thing in years that couldn't be solved by logic. He ran background checks on people daily. But now, holding a letter from a woman he'd never seen, he couldn't even type her name because he didn't have one. The next morning, before the sun even rose, he walked to the lobby again. Same coat, same gloves. This time he brought something with him. A pen, a single sheet of paper, and a reply. He didn't start with "Dear Future Wife." He didn't try to match her poetry or mimic her tone. He just wrote the one sentence that had been stuck in his head since he read her words. You're not invisible. I see you. Then another. Not with my eyes. Not yet. But through your words. And that's the part most people never show. He didn't sign a name. Didn't include a return address. But he folded it neatly, placed it in an envelope, and wrote 3 simple words on the front. For her eyes only. He returned to the mail chute where he'd found hers, placed it gently inside, and left. June didn't notice the envelope that morning. Not right away. She was late. The alarm didn't go off, the coffee was burnt, and the wind nearly snapped her scarf off as she crossed the street toward the bookstore. She didn't notice it until she got home, until she was kicking off her boots and unwrapping from the cold, and saw something white on the floor near a radiator. At first, she thought it was junk mail, or a misplaced note, but when she picked it up and read the words, her breath caught. For her eyes only. No name, no logo, just a letter. She opened it slowly, hands trembling, not with fear, but with something more complicated. Hope. She read the first line, and her knees almost gave out. You're not invisible. I see you. It didn't make sense. No one could have read her letters. They were sealed, stored, private, but something in her chest, something instinctual, told her this wasn't a prank. It was real. Someone had answered her silence. She clutched the letter to her chest, and for the first time in years, she smiled. She didn't sleep that night. The letter lay open on her nightstand like it was watching her, like it had something more to say, but only if she stared long enough. It had no name, no signature, no return address, but somehow it saw her. Not her smile, or her clothes, or her curated answers to polite questions. It saw the quiet in her, the ache she never said out loud, the part of her that had long ago stopped expecting anyone to notice. She reread it 5 times, not for clues, but for connection, for that tiny sliver of warmth that reminded her she wasn't invisible. Then, without even realizing what she was doing, she got out of bed, walked to the kitchen, and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She hesitated, pen hovering, then wrote, You don't know me, and maybe that's the safest part, because if you did, you might not have answered. But thank you for writing, for seeing me. She paused, bit the inside of her cheek, then added, I don't know if this is a mistake, but if you're still listening, I think I want to be seen again. She folded it carefully, labeled the front, to whoever you are, then slid it into the same mail chute where hers had once disappeared. Miles didn't expect her to write back. He didn't expect anything at all. That was the rule. No expectations, no attachments. No name, no consequences. But the next morning, his driver handed him a white envelope from the lobby bin. No stump, no address. Just handwriting he recognized immediately. His heart, which never raced for anything but market losses and litigation deadlines, skipped. He read it sitting in the back seat of a bulletproof car that smelled faintly of new leather and silence. If you're still listening, I think I want to be seen again. He closed his eyes, let the weight of those words settle in the space between his ribs. He was in trouble, not the kind with contracts or clauses or headlines. The kind that made him want to feel again. They wrote for a week. Every night, she slipped a letter into the chute before bed. Every morning, he picked it up before the staff arrived. No names, no questions that felt too real. Just pieces of themselves, passed like secrets between ghosts. They talked about books, about songs that felt like memories. She told him she didn't believe in fate, but sometimes dreamed of meeting someone who'd read her heart before her face. He told her about silence, about how loud the world became when you stopped pretending to be someone people expected you to be. She didn't know his age. He didn't know her face. But somehow, they were the only people who made sense to each other. And then, one night, she asked a question that changed everything. Do you believe people can fall in love through letters? Miles read it 3 times. He didn't have an answer, not a clean one, because part of him, the part that lived in strategy and structure, want to say no. You can't love what you don't see. You can't trust what you can't measure. But the part that stayed up rereading her handwriting, the part that waited every morning just to find her words in his hands, that part knew. He was already falling. So he wrote back. I think people fall in love in all the wrong ways. Through memories, through pain, through things they don't understand yet. But sometimes, maybe letters are the safest way to tell the truth before the world ruins it. She read it with her hand over her mouth. Then, trembling, heart racing, she wrote only one sentence in reply. Then maybe I'm already halfway there. That night, Miles didn't sleep. He stared at his office window as the city pulsed beneath him. The skyline stretched forever. Glass and steel, light and noise. He had everything, but he couldn't stop thinking about the woman who gave him something he couldn't buy. Her honesty, the kind that cost you nothing and everything. He pulled open his desk drawer, stared at a nameplate he hadn't used in years. Miles Thorne, CEO, Thorne Digital Holdings. He used to be proud of that name. Now, it felt like a wall between him and the one person who didn't care what he owned, only how he felt. And she didn't even know who he was. Not yet. There are things you never say aloud. Not because they're shameful, but because the moment they leave your lips, they become real. June had kept that thing buried for almost a decade, tucked behind every polite smile, every I'm fine, every nod in crowded rooms that felt more like performance than presence. But somehow, writing to him, the man with no name, no face, just words, made her braver. So she wrote it down. I've only been in love once. Then paused. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but memory. He was never mine. Not really. He belonged to someone else the whole time. But I didn't know that until it broke me. She took a breath. It's the kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream. It just lingers, like fog in your lungs. I think that's why I started writing letters. To someone who didn't know my past, who wouldn't look at me with that mix of pity and confusion. She folded the paper, slid it into the envelope, then stared at it for a long time before slipping it into the chute. That night, she didn't expect an answer. She wasn't even sure she wanted one. Miles read her letter at 4:16 a.m. in his office, backlit by the glow of a skyline that never slept. He didn't blink, didn't move, just read her confession in silence, and felt something unravel in his chest. Not sympathy, not admiration, recognition. He'd never told anyone about Isabella, not even his closest advisors, not the press, not his lawyers, not the board that demanded he separate business from emotion. They didn't know what happened in Barcelona that summer. or how long he stood at that hospital window, staring at a heartbeat monitor that never recovered. She wasn't his either. Not officially. Just another almost. Another might have been that turned into regret. And maybe that's why her words hit so hard. They didn't scream. They lingered. Like fog. He didn't write her back right away. For the first time since their letters began, he hesitated. Because to reply meant telling her the truth. And he didn't know how much truth he had left to give. Instead, he poured himself a drink he wouldn't finish. Sat at his desk until the sun started creeping between buildings. Then finally, he wrote, "We don't choose who breaks us. But sometimes the people we weren't meant to have teach us how to hold the ones we're meant for." He paused, stared at the paper, then added, "You are more than what hurt you." That's not wishful thinking. That's clarity. And I hope, if nothing else, that these letters are giving you back the parts you forgot you still owned. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "I understand." He just gave her space to be unbroken. And somehow, that felt like the most honest thing he'd ever done. June didn't cry when she read it, but she sat down on her kitchen floor like her legs had stopped remembering how to stand. She read it twice, then again, each sentence like a thread, pulling something loose inside her that had been knotted for years. She hadn't realized how long she'd been carrying the weight of being too much for someone who only ever gave her half a heart. And now she was being told, not asked, not begged, but told, she was more than what broke her. And she believed it, because he did. She began to wonder about him more. Not just what he looked like, but where he lived, whether he drank coffee in the morning or tea at night, whether he had old grief in his bones or just new dreams he hadn't dared to say aloud. She wondered what his real name was, whether he had one, but she never asked, because sometimes the best connections are born where names don't matter. Only the parts of us we don't share with anyone else. Miles started waking up earlier, arriving at the building before sunrise. Not because of inspections or reports, but because he couldn't stand waiting. It was never just a letter. It was her, in the spaces between words, in the pauses between sentences, in the weight of her thoughts. And yet, he still hadn't told her the truth. That he wasn't just some man in a quiet building. That he owned it. That he'd watched her once, from across the street, coat collar turn up, afraid of what it meant to even see her. That he'd Googled her once and stopped the moment he saw her name appear because it felt like cheating. He didn't want her past. He wanted what she gave only him. The version of her that wrote without fear. And then came the letter that scared him most. "Can we meet?" She didn't expect him to say yes. It took everything in her, every flicker of bravery she had left, to even write the question. Can we meet? No expectations. No pressure. Just a chance to prove this was real. That two strangers could fall in love with thoughts before faces. That something that started in silence could survive the sound of actual voices. She gave him the place. Neutral. Familiar. A cafe 2 blocks from her building. Old, quiet, the kind where people still talked instead of scrolled. She chose Tuesday at 4 o'clock. Not quite evening. Not quite empty. She told herself if he didn't come, she'd be okay. But when the clock hit 3:52, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Miles had read her letter 3 times. Then folded it. Then unfolded it again. He stared at the words, "Can we meet?" like they were laced with fire. Because part of him, the part that still lived inside control, wanted to say no. No, because once she saw him, it would all change. No, because she didn't know who he was, what he owned, what he was hiding, and worst of all, what he'd already done. He hadn't just answered her letters. He'd tracked every drop-off, read every one she never meant anyone to see. He'd paid for building security reports to make sure no one else ever touched them. He'd protected her anonymity so fiercely, it had almost become obsession. He told himself it was respect. But now he didn't know. He only knew one thing. He could not go. He didn't bring a driver. He didn't wear a suit. He chose a simple gray coat, the kind you forget in an empty diner booth. Something that didn't say power or presence or attention. And he arrived early. He stood across the street at 3:40, watching people come and go, wondering if she'd walk past and not recognize him, if she'd sense it was him before he ever said a word. But at 3:59, she walked in. And for the first time since this began, he couldn't breathe. She wore a navy wool sweater, tucked just slightly into dark jeans. Her hair was down, loose, wind-tossed in a way that made her look entirely alive. She didn't carry a phone, just a notebook, just in case. She ordered a tea, sat at the window, checked the time, and waited. She looked calm, but Miles knew better. She was scanning every person who walked in, listening for a voice she'd never heard, searching for someone who could say more with silence than 1,000 strangers screaming. And then, at exactly 4:07, a man walked in. Late 20s, soft brown hair, slim smile. He looked nervous. He walked right up to her. "June?" he asked, a little unsure. She looked up, blinked, nodded. "Yes." Miles froze. That man wasn't him. For a second, Miles couldn't move. He didn't know who the guy was. Some coincidence, maybe. Some person with the wrong table. The wrong name. The wrong moment. But he watched June's face carefully. She smiled, polite, but distant. The man fumbled an apology and backed away. Wrong table after all. She nodded, lips pressed together, then returned to her tea. But her eyes, they dimmed, just slightly, like hope had been preparing for a reveal, and no one had walked through the curtain. Miles watched from across the street. Paralyzed. This was the moment. He could walk in, sit down, say something that felt like everything and nothing all at once. But instead, he stepped back into the shadow of the alley, back into the comfort of knowing her through paper, not presence. And in that moment, he made a choice. To become a ghost again. She waited another 20 minutes. Didn't cry. Didn't text anyone. Just watched the rain hit the sidewalk outside and imagined what his voice might have sounded like. She walked home slower than usual. Stopped once to look at the sky, thick with late winter gray. Then climbed the stairs to her apartment, turned the key, and sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing her coat. She didn't write that night. Didn't leave a letter in the chute. And that silence? It hurt more than any goodbye ever had. Miles sat in his office for hours. The unopened whiskey on his desk. Her photo, the one he printed from building security to ensure her safety, flipped upside down. He'd done what he thought was right. He kept her from disappointment, from confusion, from the truth that might have turned all those beautiful words into betrayal. But he didn't feel like a protector. He felt like a coward. And he knew, if she never wrote again, he had no one to blame but himself. He told himself she was better off, that she deserved someone simpler, someone honest from the start, not a man who built an empire on facades and firewall protections, not a man who'd read her most vulnerable thoughts before ever earning the right to hear them. So he did what men like Miles Thorne did best. He disappeared. No more letters. No more sunrise walks to the building. No more chasing something he didn't think he had the right to hold. He buried her words in a drawer behind signed NDAs and board resolutions. He muted the memory of her smile behind shareholder calls and quarterly goals. He deleted the folder named JC from his encrypted drive. And still, he couldn't stop hearing her voice. Not a real one. He didn't even know what that sounded like. But the voice from her letters. The one that spoke through doubt and dream, heartbreak and hope. The one that said, "If you exist, thank you." June waited 2 days. Then 3. She checked the chute like a woman pretending not to hope, but still hoping anyway. Each time it was empty. The disappointment didn't surprise her, but it still stung. Maybe she'd ruined it. Maybe she shouldn't have asked to meet. Maybe the magic only lived inside the anonymity. Still, she couldn't let it end like this. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She wrote, "One last time. I guess this is goodbye. It's funny, I don't even know your name, but I think I'll always remember the way your words felt. You made me feel seen in a world that looked right through me. And maybe that's enough. Maybe you weren't meant to stay. Just to remind me I'm not broken. That someone, somewhere, still hears me, even in silence." She folded the letter slower than any she'd ever written. Her hands lingered at the edges, like saying goodbye to something more than just paper. She slipped it into the chute, didn't wait for a reply, just walked away. Miles found the letter the next morning. Not because he went looking, but because his driver, confused by the change in routine, had followed the backup calendar reminder Miles forgot to delete. Pick up from Monroe and West, 6:45 a.m. And when Miles stepped out of the car, heart pounding, pretending it was just coincidence, there was one envelope. No date, no name, just an ending. He opened it under gray sky and the hum of a flickering hallway light. And when he read her words, he broke, not outwardly. No sobs, no shouting, no cinematic unraveling, just stillness. Sharp, sudden stillness, like something inside him had been clipped at the root. He didn't go to work that day, didn't return calls, didn't respond to emails flagged urgent or read. He sat in the back corner of his penthouse library, the one no one else had access to, and stared at the letter like it was the only thing real in a world he'd spent years designing to look perfect. And for the first time in years, he hated himself, not because he lied, but because he let her go before giving her the truth. He'd spent his entire life controlling outcomes, predicting fallout, calculating risk. But with her, he just walked away. And now, he didn't know if he'd ever get another chance. That night, June went for a walk. No code, no purpose, just motion. She passed couples sharing headphones, past open windows glowing with soft music and soup on stoves and stories she'd never be part of. She didn't cry, but her heart ached, not from loss, but from what almost was. She paused at the bookstore's front window, looked at her reflection, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to him, but to herself, for having the courage to try. Back in his penthouse, Miles stared at the envelope, then did something he never did. He wrote without thinking. No drafts, no edits, no control. Just this. You were never invisible to me, not even for a second. I read your words like scripture, like sunlight, like the only voice that ever spoke to the version of me I forgot existed. I didn't show up that day, and I regret it more than anything I've ever done. But if there's still a sliver of space left, one more letter's worth of hope, I'd like to meet you. No secrets, no sados, just the man behind the paper, and the woman who changed him. He folded it slowly, sealed it, then walked it down himself. No driver, no code, no hesitation. It had been 2 days since she let go. 2 days since the last letter. 2 days since she told herself, really told herself, that some people are just meant to be passing stars. Bright, brief, and beautiful enough to change your sky before they vanish. June hadn't cried. She'd done that already years ago for men who never saw her. But this time felt different, not because of how it ended, but because of how real it had felt while it lasted. There's a grief that comes not from heartbreak, but from being understood once, so deeply, and never again. And that's what she carried now, quietly, like a poem she wouldn't finish. It was late when she got home. The bookstore had closed early, power outage. She'd stopped at the deli for chamomile tea and half tried to smile at the guy who always flirted awkwardly near the freezer section. By the time she reached her door, her arms were full, keys buried in her tote, mind elsewhere. She didn't notice the envelope at first, not until she turned slightly and saw it, taped to her door, just above the handle, white, clean, folded with care. Her name, handwritten across the front. June. No title, no initials, just her. Her hands stilled, breath hitched. She peeled it free, slowly, unfolded the flap. Inside was one page, nothing else, and it read, "I never deserved your words, but I've kept every one, not out of obsession, out of reverence, because you reminded me what it meant to be human again." She paused. Her fingers trembled. "My name is Miles Thorne." Her breath stopped. "You know me, even if you don't recognize me yet. I've seen you, the real you, and that version of you is safe with me. But it's time I stop hiding. If you'll meet me, no letters, no illusions, I'll be waiting. At the bottom, an address, just 3 blocks away. No apartment number, just a name. The Thorne Building." June stood in her hallway, shoes still on, coat half zipped, tea bag crumpled in her hand. She read the letter again, and again, not for clarity. She understood every word, but for courage. She didn't run. She didn't wait, either. She changed into the softest thing she owned, a deep blue cardigan, worn at the elbows, and wrapped her hair in a low twist that wasn't perfect. But it was hers. And then, she walked, out of the building, into the night, towards something she thought had ended. The Thorn building stood like a monolith in the city skyline. Sharp, steel, quietly powerful, the kind of structure you don't just pass by, you notice. She stood outside its entrance, looking up through the glass. She'd passed it 100 times before, but never knew the man behind it. Had once read her broken heart and written back. Inside, the lobby was warm, polished, empty except for one security guard, who nodded politely and gestured toward the elevator. He didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. Floor 44. Penthouse. The doors opened. She stepped in. The ride felt endless and instant all at once. The elevator opened to a quiet landing. No music. No noise. Just soft city light streaming through 10-foot windows and the muted hum of a world far below. And then she saw him, standing near the far window, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly tense. He turned, and in that moment, there were no surprises. Because even though they'd never spoken, she knew him, by posture, by presence, by the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing real in a world of glass. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he stepped forward, not quickly, like a man walking into something he didn't deserve, but was willing to fight for. He didn't reach for her. He didn't speak first. He just stood there, waiting, inviting. She took one step forward, then another, until they stood only a breath apart. Then softly, she said, "You didn't ruin the magic." And he replied, "You were the magic." She didn't speak first. She just stood there, in his world, the penthouse, the skyline, the silence that smelled like money and power and perfectly conditioned air, and waited. And that's what undid him. She didn't demand an explanation. She didn't flinch. She gave him space to tell the truth, or to lie. And for once in his life, Miles didn't choose the easier route. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding something in for a decade, then said quietly, "I wasn't supposed to find the letter." He stepped forward, just slightly, like he was afraid of spooking her. His voice stayed low, steady, like a man used to speaking to rooms full of fear. But this wasn't a room he could control. This was her. "The mail chute was open," he said. "I was walking the building. Just routine. And there it was. Letter number 37. He paused. "I thought it would be a cute note. A scribble. I read it, and something stopped." June didn't move, but her eyes stayed locked on his. "I didn't mean to reply," he admitted. "I just could not." He let the silence hang, then added, "You were the first person who ever spoke to the part of me I didn't know how to name." She stepped forward now, still silent, still studying him. And then, "How many did you read?" He swallowed. "All of them," he said. "The ones that fell. The ones you left. The ones you never meant to mail." June blinked, not in fear, not in rage, but in processing. "You knew who I was?" He nodded. "Eventually, but I didn't search your name. Not until I had to know you were safe." She looked down, not because she doubted him, but because she was letting herself feel what that meant. He stepped closer. "I know how this looks," he said. "Dull. And I hate that I became someone who made your letters a secret. You didn't give them to me. I took them." He shook his head once, sharply. "But I swear to you, they saved me." June's breath caught. "I didn't fall for a fantasy," he said. "I didn't fall for your words. I fell for your courage. The way you still told the truth when no one was listening." He looked down, then back at her, like it was the last thing he could offer. "If you walk away now, I won't stop you. But if you stay..." He stepped closer again. "I want to know the sound of your voice when you're happy, not just honest." June felt her throat tighten. She thought about the hours they'd written, the truths they'd never shared with anyone else, and how even now, even here, he wasn't charming her. He wasn't persuading. He was just standing there, open. She didn't answer with words. She simply reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a letter. One she hadn't sent. One she'd written the night after their almost meeting. She held it out. Miles took it with both hands, like it was breakable, sacred. He opened it. Inside it read, "I don't know your name. I don't know your face. But I know this. You make silence feel like company. You make loneliness feel like being seen." He looked up, and in her eyes, there was no hate, no fear, just forgiveness, and something deeper, something beginning. They didn't kiss. Not yet. They just stood there, inches apart, letting all the walls between them fall. And then she said, "Okay." He blinked. "Okay." She smiled. Small, real, the kind that breaks and rebuilds in the same breath. "I'll stay," she said. They sat down on the floor. No table, no wine, no ceremony, just him and her, talking, laughing, remembering lines from letters neither of them had realized meant so much. He told her about Barcelona, about the summer he lost someone he loved, and the man he became afterward, colder, sharper, untouchable. She told him about the year she stopped celebrating her birthday, the year she stopped believing anyone would really choose her. He told her about his mother, the first woman who ever told him vulnerability was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. She told him about the first time she was told she was too much. They told the truth, not to fix it, just to be seen. And when the sun finally rose, June stood near the window in a sweater he loaned her, holding tea she hadn't finished. He stepped behind her, no contact, just presence. She turned to him and asked, "So what happens now?" Miles smiled, almost shy. "Now," he said, "we stop writing." She raised an eyebrow. "And we start living." There were no more letters after that. Not because they stopped needing each other, but because they finally had each other. The space between them, once filled with ink and folded pages, became filled with coffee spoons, soft laughs, and the kind of quiet that didn't ask to be filled, only shared. June still wrote sometimes, but not to him. She wrote in the mornings, long before he woke up, journals that smelled like vanilla and city dust. She wrote to remember, to process, to heal. But the letters that once held her hope, now she lived those lines, out loud, with him. Miles didn't try to control this, didn't strategize, or plan the arc of their romance like a quarterly roadmap. He simply showed up. For the bookstore readings, she still helped run. For the days, she forgot how to believe in herself. For the nights, she curled up beside him in silence, and didn't need to explain why. He told her once, weeks after their first real conversation, "You gave me a way back to my own voice by letting me borrow yours." She didn't answer. She just pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "Home isn't a place. It's a person." They didn't get married right away. There were no fireworks, no tabloid engagement, no penthouse proposal with champagne and scripted declarations. Just one Sunday morning in a secondhand bookstore, June paused while scanning a page and said, "Hey, if we ever did get married, could we do it here?" He looked up from across the aisle, then smiled like he already knew the answer. A year later, they exchanged vows between poetry shelves. A closed ceremony, 10 guests, her sister, his best friend. No photograpers. She wore a dress that cost less than her favorite boots. He wore a suit without a tie, sleeves rolled up. And when the officiant said, "You may speak," Miles didn't need a speech. He just pulled a letter from his pocket, one he'd never sent, letter number 38. He read it quietly, and June cried like every word had come from her own soul. After the ceremony, they sat on the floor between travel essays and vintage cookbooks, barefoot and happy. And she whispered, "You still owe me an answer." He grinned. "To what?" "To the question I wrote you years ago, before I even knew you were real." He pretended to think, then said, "Yes, I believe people can fall in love through letters. Because I did, but only because the woman behind the letters was brave enough to live beyond them." Years passed. The world changed, but their quiet didn't. It simply deepened. They built a life not from grand gestures, but from small rituals. One fresh flower on the breakfast table, one handwritten note taped to the mirror every Monday, one promise, spoken or unspoken, to never stop choosing each other. And every now and then, when she felt the weight of the world pressing against her ribs, she'd reach for that green shoebox, now faded and worn. She'd pull out letter number 1, the one that started all. "Dear future husband." She'd smile, because she could finally picture his face at the end of that sentence. Not as a fantasy, not as a hope, but as him. The man who saw her, the man who waited, the man who read between the lines, and loved her enough to meet her there.